Good evening and welcome to Spotlight on the Arts. I'm your host tonight, Bill Hirschman. I'm the editor-in-chief critic of FloridaTheaterOnStage.com, and I'm joined tonight by a wonderful panel of theater denizens, starting with the founder of this program, the teacher, actor, director, coach, Iris Acker.
I'm very impressed.
So am I. And next to her, or standing across from her, is the Carbonell winning actress. Yes, it's Karen Stevens. And finally, standing in as well as he can for Michael McKeever is the wonderful artistic director of Island City Stage, Andy Rogo. Eclipsing all of us is a face and a voice that you should know from years and years of her experience here in the South Florida theater scene, Beverly Blanchette. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. You have been everywhere.
Well.
Just about.
Done everything.
A lot of people know you as from your years as a dean of theater in the Palm Beach County School District. They've seen you on stage. But you've left the school district and you've now created an Act Two.
Right.
Would you talk about what your Act Two is now?
Well, I'm acting. I have done some directing professionally, but I decided it's too hard. And I'd rather just have someone tell me what to do at this stage of my life. And I'm acting, so I'm doing that. I'm doing the auditioning, and I've been lucky to get parts in theater and film and television, some web series, and I'm a grandmother. So there's
an
that.
accomplishment.
Well, I know that you never stopped acting, but is it a little different now that is it any different that you are relying on that as one of your primary feathers in your cap? How is it different?
Yeah, well, it's different because the pressure's off. You know, as a young actor, anybody knows that it's very hard to live and be an actor. You have to have something else to do, and that's one of the reasons I went into teaching. But now I'm a retired teacher. I'm happy to say I have a nice pension, and I don't have to worry about the money. And so when I go to audition, of course I get nervous like everybody else, but I think I'm a lot less nervous than I was in the early years because it was, I mean, it's important to me now, but it was so important, you know, back then. You know, I have to get the job. I have to, God, I hope I get it. God, I hope, you know. So the pressure's off, and I'm doing it because I want to.
That's a good reason. Beverly, I really am more interested in you as a director, as an educator. Actresses today do have classes, so to speak, and they do teach. But you were working at Dreyfus. I mean, that was big. How many students had you taught while you were there?
Well, I was at Dreyfus 20 years, and before that, I taught another 15 years. I've been kind of all over the state. I started teaching in Tallahassee straight out of FSU, taught there for a while, and I grew up in Miami, so I kept wanting to get back to South Florida because Tallahassee was just a little too slow for me. But so then I ended up at Vero Beach High School, and then more locally here at Santa Lucis High School, and then I was very fortunate to get the position at Dreyfus, so I was there 20 years. So over the course of my whole career, if it was just 100 students a year, it was 3,500 students. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So do you feel any pressure now, like when you're acting, that students will come and you have to be able to show that you can actually practice what you were teaching all those years?
Yes, that's a lot of pressure. Yes, I am probably more nervous about a former student being in the audience than anyone, because of course they're going to be, you know, looking at, well, what can she do, you know? Yeah, it makes me a little nervous.
What was, is there something that you imparted to your students during the years that you were teaching that has proved to be valuable to you now?
Oh, good question.
Oh, thank you.
I like that.
You know,
I like that question.
I think you learn so much more as a teacher, maybe even than you ever learn as a student. And so I learned a lot from them over the years. Just just the audition process, for example. You know, I always told my students this story about when I was at FSU auditioning for Our Town. And of course, I wanted the part of Emily. And this is 1973, I show up in bell-bottom jeans, they're hip huggers, I've got this crop top, I've got my long straight hair, my dark tan, all this makeup. And I was called back. It was between me and another girl. And she shows up with her plain hair, no makeup, simple little flowered dress, ballet flats, and she got the part. And back then, you know, I kept thinking, I should have gotten the part. I was so much better there. I cried real tears, you know. And but she got there. So then, skip to 5 years later, and I'm teaching, and I see these students coming into audition, and they're not dressed properly, or you know, even close to the part. So it's hard to imagine someone. How could the director even imagine me as Emily, you know, when I look like young hippie chick? So that's probably the biggest thing. I've learned how to audition from them, and I think also how to take direction and how to listen, and you know.
So that's why wardrobe is so important to you.
That's why wardrobe is so important. Clothes are important. Yes, it's all about how I dress for the auditions.
Beverly and I, we're both involved with the Shakespeare troupe of South Florida, and I'm always giggle at Beverly because she comes festooned with costume pieces. She's always prepared with, in case whatever she needs, she's gonna have it. It's gonna be in that bag. And I was like, so now I know where that comes from. That's good.
Yeah, well, and you know,
you're always prepared.
But also with the Shakespeare troupe, you never know what part you're gonna play.
Exactly.
Peter's gonna say, oh well, now you're the main guard, you know, whatever, and so I'll have a hat to put on and a jacket or something.
Who were your teachers?
I went to Miami Norland High School, and my teachers were Mrs. Oliver and Mrs. Fetzner, and I have to say that they, along with some of my English teachers and a special history teacher too, encouraged what I was doing. They knew I was interested in acting, and I wasn't real good in other things. And so they would allow me, if there was a project to do or something, they'd say, well, why don't you create a little play about this? And that was kind of my life, too. I grew up being actor, director. I put on plays in our basement, and I wrote them, I directed them, and I starred in them. And I brought in all the neighborhood kids. But I did that in school, too. They would allow me to act for these projects, and that didn't work so well with math, but with everything else it did. And then I went to Miami-Dade Community College my first 2 years, and I studied with Paula Milton. I think she's a name that a lot of people know, and she was really inspiring to me, and she made me believe in myself. And so I owe a lot to her. Yeah. And then I've taken a lot of classes over the years. I mean, I'm always learning, and I love learning. As soon as I retired, I joined Burt Reynolds' master acting class, and so I've been doing that most Friday nights since. And I had a wonderful opportunity to study at the Globe for 2 weeks. This was right after I retired, because again, I was freaking out, you know, like, because I was used to being so busy, and I thought, what am I going to do with my life? So I applied for this program at the Globe, and I was accepted into that. And then a week after that, I was accepted into a directing program at Juilliard.
Wow.
It's interesting because, and you also coach now, correct?
Yes.
The reason I find it fascinating is I remember interviewing a local actor who had worked up in New York and had come home and decided to make a career here. And he said one of the biggest differences that he saw is that after you got to be about 28 or 30 years old, that a lot of local actors, not all of them, but a lot, stopped taking classes. Where in New York, you're taking classes until you're 76 years old. But down here, they don't. Do you have any idea why that might be? Or do you see that? You may not agree with that.
I don't know. I do know a lot of actors who continue to study. I know it's important for me, especially when I first retired and wanted to really be that actress I always wanted to be. I hadn't done it in a long time, other than, you know, a part here or there. And for me, it was about working the muscle again, you know, and learning lines again. And I wanted to put that pressure on myself. So for me, that's a pretty big pressure to perform in front of Burt Reynolds. You know, and the first scene I did for him, you know, I had to memorize these lines, and I hadn't done that in a long time. And so now I've learned. Now I know how to learn lines. But it's about working the mind, and especially when you get to a certain age, you know.
Are there workshops here for actors like yourself coming? I mean, workshops I'm talking about. Let's say, Karen, do you take a workshop?
I don't take a workshop
Is
right
there
now,
a
but I
workshop
was
that
thinking
you could
about
take?
Bill's question, and I think because a lot of actors are working down
A second
here.
job, a day job.
Well, day job and also on stage. Like you know, in New York, there's so many actors, and so few of them actually work in the city. They leave the city and work in regional theater.
Yeah.
So, but down here, the actors who live here year round, most actors work regularly, and so that might be one reason. They might not have time to take classes.
Could be.
Or they might be giving classes themselves.
I always said that they, after a while of having studied and worked and worked and worked and worked, and that there isn't a class for them. So
I think that's part of it too. You know, we're a much more spread out community because people have tried. There have been schools that have tried to open. The Theater League actually tried to offer that for a little while. And you know, people start classes, and then people will show up a couple times, and then they don't. You know.
Master
then they
classes,
stop.
so to speak, a lot.
But even weekly, you know, even weekly workshops, there's
hard
definitely
to-
a dearth,
Yeah.
but it's harder to get to. It's not like in New York
Yeah.
where you take a subway, you're 15 minutes, you're to class, and there's millions of people who are within that 15 minutes. You know, here it's like someone would have to offer class in Palm Beach, someone would have to offer class in Miami. You know, it's-
Exactly.
Big,
But particularly
big
master
reason.
classes, like you were saying. I mean, I'm sure that if you're a young actor, you can find coaches and people out there. But the advanced techniques, for instance, you mentioned the Shakespeare operation. You know, one of my grand complaints is that you can count on your hands and feet the number of actors down here who have that well-developed muscle, because there isn't a lot done.
And
But
yet I
you-
feel that it's kind of like ballet, you know, that if you're a dancer, you know, those studios are going to tell you have to take ballet first. And even if you want to do tap, you've got to have ballet. And I feel that way with Shakespeare. I think that that's the beginning. And if you can do Shakespeare, you can do anything.
If you
Right.
want to do Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how did you find that, you know, having been dean for 20 years, how did students change over the course of that time? You know, is there a difference? Are they all still eager?
I don't know that it's the students who have changed as much as it has the whole educational system. You know, that changed a lot. There are still young, eager students. There are still students who, you know, want to find themselves. They want to find that spark, and there are always those students. But the educational system itself, I think, has made it more difficult for artists because of all of this testing. And I noticed that even at the School of the Arts, which was created for artists, for students who maybe weren't necessarily good in other areas, you know, it was based on the FAME school, you know, in New York, that here's a school where students can focus on their art, and the idea being that once you feel good about doing something, that will spread into everything else. It certainly was that way for me. As I said, I wasn't a good student in high school, but by the time I got to college and was able to major in theater, everything came up. I was suddenly on the dean's list. You know, my mom couldn't believe she had it, you know, hanging on the door, you know, that I was on the dean's list. And so that's what the school is about. But, you know, everybody answers to everybody else. And so with all of this testing, I had students taken out of my theater classes to take remedial English, to take remedial math. And again, I always thought of that school as, you know, wow, what I would have done with a school like this, you know, would have been so great for me. Well, had you taken me out of my drama class to put me in an additional math class, you know, the one wasn't enough, you know, you're going to put me in another. I could have been, I seriously could have been a dropout. And I look at the arts for many kids as a dropout prevention program. And so that's
We'll talk about that, please.
That's what keeps them in school. That's what, you know, those students, that's what keeps them in school. It's that being in the drama class, being in the art, being in the band, you know, going to rehearsal, feeling a sense of community, you know, that's why those kids go to school. And so I became, you know, very disillusioned, you know, and I fought it. I fought it as much as I could, you know. When someone was taken out of my class, I'd go down to the principal and say, but, you know, well, they need remedial reading because they're not passing the reading portion of the FCAT, you know. And I'd say, but they're reading Shakespeare in my class, and they're analyzing plays, and, you know, they understand the language, and so they don't. I didn't test well either, because who wants to read about Pluto? You know, I would read those and just get bored.
But he's so cute.
Exactly. So the students haven't changed. It's the world around them.
The system.
And it's the system, and I hope it changes.
But I often see that Dreyfus, you know, it's an A-rated school. It's often rated one of the top schools in the state. So how were they able to balance the academics and the arts? You know, was it the principal that was sort of responsible for that? Did the principal instill in the faculty the importance of keeping the academics up? I mean,
well, we had, that was part of it, that once you entered the school, that you had to maintain at least a B average in your arts classes, and at least a C in your academic classes. And if you went below that, you were then put on probation, and if you didn't bring it up during that semester of probation, then you were asked to leave. Now, those were in the early days of the school. Things changed again, because then there were parent complaints and all of that, and so then it got harder to let students go. And the shame of that is that you end up with students there who don't necessarily really want to be there. But I have to say that the students, again, and I believe it's because they felt good about themselves, because of that, everything got better. So when we auditioned the students, we weren't allowed to look at grades or resumes or anything. Their entrance was based on that 10-minute audition, and it still is. And so you would often get students who weren't doing so well in their middle schools, and then they came to us and they succeeded, you know, and they excelled at everything. And it's that matter of feeling good about yourself, you know, and believing that you can do something.
So you're an acting coach now. Did your coaching style come from your years as a director teaching? Can you describe it for us?
A lot. I work mostly with young actors, and primarily they come to me because they want help with their audition for the art schools. I also work with students auditioning for college programs and some professional actors. But I find that most of what I do is train, you know, the actors' habits themselves. I mean, it's usually very simple things like plant your feet and don't sway and focus, and let's look at the punctuation, and let's follow what the playwright has to say. You know, if you read the line the way it's written, it will be right every time. And learn it word for word, because that playwright labored over every single word. It's not your right to paraphrase it. And so that's a lot of what I do. And then when I get beyond that, then we can go into deeper things. And of course, the farther along someone is in their own career and training, you know, the deeper we can go. But in the beginning, it's just stand still, you know. And some of them have real funny habits, and that's what I notice a change in as time goes on. There are different habits that they have. There's this new thing that a lot of actors do where when they are referring to themselves, there's a lot of this. It's like, I love you, you know, and I'm like, what is that gesture? And, and then I'll do that back to them, and I'll say, doesn't that look weird, you know, and I'll, you know, it's about following through with the gesture, or, you know, avoiding chicken arms, you know, go pick up that vase, and then I'll say, no, go pick up that, you know, it's those kinds of things. A lot of the young actors, they do this thing where they're being really serious, you know, and I really mean what I'm saying. It's all of this head shaking, and I have to say, stop shaking your head. So it's really just basic, and how to dress and how to present yourself, and we'll go over. I'll look at their headshots, and those who want to go into it professionally, and I'll refer them to a photographer, and I'll look at their headshots, and you know, I'll help them with their resumes, you know, clean that up, and I do a lot of teaching them about the business. Honestly, a lot of what I do is what I didn't get as a student, and I always wanted to be that teacher who would have given me what I needed. And you know, I studied acting at Miami-Dade, which was great, and FSU, which was great, but no one taught us the business of the business.
For instance, what kinds of things do you think they need to know?
They need to know how to audition. They need to know how to choose material for an audition, how to find monologues. They need to know to read plays so they can find them and not just go to a monologue book or on the internet.
And to go to the theater, I'm hoping you tell them.
And to go to the theater, because, and you know, again, you said, well, is your style of coaching based on teaching? Yes, but it's also because I've always gone to the theater. I've always gone to the theater, and I learned most of what I know from watching, both as a director and as an actor. And they need to know about headshots and resumes.
The
and
business side of the business.
They need to know the business of the business. So if they want to get into television and film, they know how to get it. They need to know how to get an agent, how to find the right agent, someone who's not going to take advantage of them, because there are a lot of people down here who do that. And I think the college programs are doing that now, but they didn't then, which was 40-something years ago.
Yeah, I didn't get that either. I remember going to SETC when I was in college, and I didn't know what equity was.
Right.
And I showed up there without a headshot. And I mean, that's just how, I mean, it's like, really, I gotta think about that now, and I'm mortified. I was so embarrassed, you know, but I was totally unprepared.
Well, I lecture at New World School of the Arts on the business side of the business and the unions, and I explain actors' equity mostly to them. And they're always shocked when I encourage them, when you graduate, please don't run out and join equity. Don't, because you'll be saying dinner is served for the rest of your career. Because what do? They go to New York, and the competition is so fierce, you know. So the thing is, if to get your experience, yes, doing non-union work, doing good non-union work, because they have been so well trained, they'll get work like that.
Well, and it's treating the audition as a job interview.
Yes.
That's what I find lacking too in a lot of the younger people I see, is that they're not only how to dress, which you've emphasized, but just how to comport yourself, how to talk to people, how to say, you know, how to impress people, because I'm not just hiring you as an actor, I'm hiring you as someone I have to work with for several weeks. I want to know that that's going to be a good experience. They have no clue, but I hear that from the real world too, that younger people are not good at interviewing for jobs anymore.
Well, and I find that a lot of them, another thing that they have to learn is the whole rehearsal process and what is appropriate. You know, since I've, you know, again, since my retirement from teaching, now I'm in the professional world, and I can't believe some of the things that I see actors do. You know, coming in late, not knowing their lines. You know, I'm amazed, and I think it's just because they're not getting that training. No one's telling them.
Phones on in the dressing room.
Eating in the dressing room, eating in costume. You know, these things that, you know, were, you know, what I taught, you know, as a theater teacher. You know, these are the, you know, I eventually at Dreyfus came up with a department handbook. It became about that thick, and other theater programs across the country have adopted it.
Great.
Because I just got so tired of saying the same things over and over again. So I finally, all right, these are your rules for rehearsal. You know, this is our casting policy. You know, this is, you know, and you know, everything was in there because I got tired of saying it over and over again.
I'm just dying to ask, when you coach the young kids, especially to get into something like Dreyfus, do you have to coach the parents as well?
No, sometimes
That's a course in itself.
Sometimes the parents are the hardest part because I always leave it open because, you know, the lessons are in my home. And so I let the parents know you're welcome to stay or you're welcome to go get coffee, whatever, and you can pop in whenever you want. And a lot of the things we'll do is we'll practice the interview part of the audition, which again is a life skill. That's what it is. And it's so funny, if the parent stays and I'm interviewing the child, Mom over here keeps answering questions, you know, and you know, is saying, well, don't forget to say this and don't forget to say that. And I have to tell the moms, don't tell them what to say. Because what I notice a lot of times, and I noticed this at Dreyfus when we had students come in and we would do the interview, they were little robots, you know. Why do you want to come to the school? I want to broaden my horizons. You know, you're 13 years old. I'm pretty sure that, you know, you didn't come up with, I want to broaden my horizons on your own. So, yeah, and there are those parents who are constantly interrupting and side coaching. I do have to politely say, you know, I think your daughter would do better if you weren't here. You know, so
or playing basketball.
Right.
I want people to know how to get in touch with you. You have a website. Would you tell them what the website is?
Yes, it's BlanchetteDirections.com.
BlanchetteDirections.com.
BLNCHETTE.
Right, right.
Yeah, and if you were to just Google me, unfortunately, all kinds of things pop up. So don't look at some things.
And with that, we will thank you for coming and educating us even better than we were.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we want to thank all of you for having joined us for another edition of Spotlight on the Arts. If you want to know more about what's going on, what to see, where to see it, whatever, check out FloridaTheaterOnStage.com. Until then, we look forward to seeing you next week here on Spotlight on the Arts. Thank you.